You talked about Thumerians going above ground, and I noticed that you talk about the executioners, but we didn't talk about the difference between the hooded executioners and the cone-headed executioners.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I was
Um,
wondering if you could talk about the difference between the
okay,
cone-headed and the hooded ones.
this is an issue that I have with the translation because in Japanese they do not have the same name, but the English has called them both executioners. So in the Japanese one, the executioner covenant, sorry, not covenant, oath, whatever you want to call it, that Alfred and Ligarius are associated with, that is executioners. But the big guys with the axes and the hoods who you see prowling around Yarnum and Hemwick in Forbidden Woods, they are just called, it would be the literal translation is like dismantling man. The idea being, like, the implication being they dismantle corpses. I think it's the same, literally the same name as given to the big red robed machete wielding guys in Undead Settlement. So they're not the same thing, which was confusing for a long time, but I'm pretty sure they're not now. And if you look at them, they wear this plate mail armor that is characteristic of Thumerians, but it's not characteristic of anything above ground. So, like, if you look at everything above ground, the closest you get to metal is either the Canehurst armor, which is described as incredibly thin, and basically the metal is just there to ward off blood, or the Yahagul iron helm, which is literally just an iron helm. The rest of the suit is cloth. So it looks a lot like the big above ground the big hooded executioner enemies are Thumerians who've come out of the Chalice dungeons and they're wandering around on the surface. And it would also explain like why they're huge, why you find them in Hemwick, why you find them outside Yahagul and Forbidden Woods and all these places that they're very heavily associated with Chalice dungeons, rather than where you would expect to find, executioner oath executioners. Like, you don't see them in Canehurst, and you like Alfred never acknowledges them. And the way that like the executioners that Ligarius led, they all had wheels that they beat the Vilebloods to death with. Whereas these ones, they all have these huge axes that presumably they dismember bodies with. The one oddity there is that the women in Canehurst, the ghosts that you talk, the ghosts women that attack you in Canehurst, they all have either a cut all the way around their throat or they're holding their own severed heads, which makes it look like they would be headed, which you can't do with a wheel. And you would need an axe for. So I guess some of the executioners that worked for Ligarius had axes, and they beheaded the women of Canehurst that way. Yeah. So the connection is like there really isn't a connection, and it's just down to them being given the same name.
Okay, great, awesome. Um. Oh, okay. Well, I guess it's kind of relevant. We meet the Winter Lanterns in the Nightmare of Menses, right?
We do.
Can you talk about them a little bit?
Okay, so Winter Lanterns are incredibly confusing. They're especially confusing in the context of the Nightmare of Menses because, like, we know at this point that they are literally the doll's body with a gigantic brain on the top, and you find two of them in the fishing hamlet near where Maria's weapon is, and so that led to this theory that like they are not necessarily linked to the doll so much as they're linked to Maria, and they're like a manifestation of her, maybe her guilty conscience or like a nightmare that she had that has transformed into this actual creature. And they have the huge brain heads, which are very reminiscent of the swollen heads of the people in the research hall. And they have almost the same attack at one point, where some of the heads from the research hall will leap on you and like kind of chew you in the same way that winter lanterns grab you. And also there are some head patients in the hall who can frenzy you in the same way that winter lanterns frenzy you.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's so true.
So like the idea that um, people, including me, came up with was like, okay, maybe the winter lanterns are like Maria's trauma manifested in the dreamlands as this odd creature. Similar to when you go to the Nightmare Frontier, there's the crawlers in the swamp, the white kind of slug monsters. When they rear up, you can see that the front of them is split open and there's messengers inside. And it's very, very similar looking to Cos. The way that when we meet Cos, who looks a lot like a crawler, has been like cut open. And there's the orphan inside her. So it's like the crawlers created from Cos's like traumatic experience. But like they're kind of like yeah, they're created by Cos's curse or anger or whatever, and they're like an echo of that. And the Winter Lanterns are maybe the same deal with Maria. The weirdness with the lanterns in reference to Menses is that they do the same attack that the Menses brain does, where their brain will glow, and then that causes your hunter to start or your blood starts shooting out of you in these like spear shapes. And the Winter Lanterns do it, and the Mensis brain does it. And what's specific about the spear attack is that what they're forming into is literally a spear. It's not like a gout of blood, and it's not just like a spike. It's an actual spear. It's got like you can see rivets in it. It's got a properly like carved spearhead. It looks like an actual spear. And that's the same attack that Yharnam does and the Thumerian Elder does, where they will summon that exact same spear made out of either blood or fire and try to stab you with it. And the Mensis brain is also creating those spears. So it's like there seems to be some connection between the Winter Lanterns, the Mensis brain, and the Thumerians. The Winter Lantern and the Thumerian connection makes sense because Maria is part Thumerian. So her having that kind of like blood manipulation ability makes sense. But I don't know how the Mensis brain fits into it at all. Because I maybe the Mensis brain is connected to the Thumerians as well, but we're not I guess it is because it drops the living string, which you need to get into Thumaru Ihel. But ah, it suggests there is a connection between the Mensa's brain and the Thumerians, which, yeah, we don't really find anything else about it. So that's the connection there.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Is there anything else that's cool or interesting that you found out about Menses recently?
Um,
I'm trying to remember.
if you want another example of Thumerian like plate mail, the
Uh-huh.
Murgo Chief Attendant enemies. Actually, I think the Murgo's Chief Attendant enemies share some move sets with the Executioners. They're like
Huh.
large Thumerians in this plate mail armor, and it's not the same, but it looks similar in that it's got like a very large stomach with this sort of stylized imagery on it. And with the Executioners, it's a face, and with the Murgo's Wetness, it's like I think it's like a flower design.
Huh. So the chief attendants are also working for Menses?
I don't know. It's very difficult to figure out because you can't get them in the same place. They probably wouldn't fight each other because enemies in Bloodborne tend not to do that, even though they probably should. In the same way that like the hunters in Yharnam who are burning the werewolf, if you get them near a werewolf, they won't fight the werewolf.
No.
which is odd, but like they're clearly supposed to be opposed to each other, but the
Yeah.
game's AI doesn't treat them as such.
Mm.
Weirdly, the only beast that like will fight other creatures for you is the beast possessed soul, of which there's only one in Yharnam, and that specific one for some reason doesn't fight them. But the ones you run into in the Chalice dungeons will fight like other if you wake up a beast possessed soul in the Chalice dungeons and like lead it into another room, it will attack other things in the room, and they will
Okay.
attack it. It's kind of like it's permanently shaman bone bladed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, in the DLC in the Hunter's Nightmare, did
Yep.
we find any Menses related information there?
I don't think we do because the Hunter's Nightmare is a memory of a time before Mensis existed. It seems like because it looks like the Hunter's Nightmare is the most recent point in the Hunter's Nightmare. I think is supposed to be when Lawrence transforms and disappears,
Okay.
and I don't think Mensis really existed then. We find the lock shield which mentions the choir, but I don't know if the choir exists at this point either because we don't see anything. We go to a memory of what's effectively up a cathedral ward, but we don't learn anything about the choir when we're there, apart from the
Mm-hmm.
lock shield, which makes me think that like the choir don't exist yet either, and the lock shield is just referencing like in the present. In the present, the choir would use the lock shield, but it predates them.
I see.
Hmm. I think like Mensis maybe don't exist until after Old Yharnam is burnt, or maybe even after Lawrence disappears. That like there's a schism in the church over what Lawrence did in beckoning the moon presence or whatever he did in Old Yharnam. And that schism is what leads to Mensis and the choir kind of squabbling over who's in charge. Because they both seem they're very both concerned with, it looks like, the pale blood sky, in that Mensis want it to happen again, and the choir are actively preventing it from happening. So it maybe there was like a schism over like, well, Lawrence's experiment has failed and destroyed Old Yharnam, and then the choir are the people who are saying no, we should never do this again, and then Mensis are the kind of like Lawrence's acolytes who are trying to recreate the experiment.
So Lawrence is the one that beckoned the red moon over Old Yarnum.
I don't know. I I don't know who else it could have been because there's a note in the research hall that just it refers to Lawrence's. It's just like the moon presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates, Pale Blood. So the only character we know who's associated with the red moon and with the moon presence is Lawrence and Gurman, and it can't really be Gurman. So I think what happened over Old Yharnam is probably Lawrence's. Like Lawrence was experimenting, trying to summon a great one, and he called down the red moon over Old Yharnam. Oh, the other thing is like the powder kegs who are involved in burning Old Yharnam. They're workshop members. They're not church members. So like this happened. You can figure out the timeline kind of because the powder kegs use weapons that are designed to mimic Canehurst weapons. So it has to have happened at some point after the church went to Canehurst. And powder kegs are members of the workshop, they're not members of the church. So they still operated out of the hunter's workshop that is recreated in the dream. They weren't operating out of the healing church. So it's like the burning of Old Yharnam took place at some point after they sacked Canehurst, but before the church before the hunters were folded into the church. So that seems contemporaneous with when Lawrence was in charge of the church.
Hmm. And is that when they encountered the moon presence?
Well, it's what we know about the moon presence is that it was summoned over. It was summoned, I think. The thing about the moon presence and the Lawrence and everything is that so much of it's bound up in stuff that was cut out of the game that it's not clear, like, did they cut this stuff out because they changed their mind, or did they just not include it, but it's still technically what happened? So, like, what we know about the moon presence is that Lawrence and his associates, whoever they are, so presumably Gurman and maybe other people, summoned the moon presence, and the moon presence created the hunter's dream, and Gurman remains in the hunter's dream. And Gurman is waiting for Lawrence to come back. If you talk to him, he says, like, Lawrence, what's taking you so long? So he is waiting for Lawrence to come back. We don't know what Lawrence set off to do, is the thing. And it's so bound up in, like, cut stuff and stuff that may or may not be true that it's hard to figure out exactly. But I think the based on, like, a bunch of cut stuff that's been dug up, it looks like they summoned the moon presence, and then Lawrence went to Old Yharnam. And the red moon happened over Old Yharnam as a God, hang on. When you go to Old Yharnam, there is the Church of the Good Chalice, which looks like, and like the roof of that church is burned off, is missing. Oh fuck, hang on. Sorry, I've got such a headache.
You need to stop partying.
The thing about Old Yharnam is, like, there are two blood-starved beasts, right? There's one that's strung up, and there's one that's in the Church of the Good Chalice. The strung-up one is also in a church, and we're told that very explicitly the giant beasts are clerics. Like, only a cleric who is constantly involving themselves with the blood and ministration and trying to achieve enlightenment will undergo the process that makes them become a very large beast like Amelia or Ludwig or Lawrence. So the blood-starved beasts look like they were both clerics because they're both very large beasts that are found in churches. And if you look at a blood-starved beast and then you look at the bloodletting beast, a blood-starved beast is basically a slightly skinnier version of the bloodletting beast if you completely, like, if you got a bloodletting beast and it was a little bit smaller and you removed pretty much all of its muscle and skin, you would have the blood-starved beast. So they look like they're the same kind of creature. And also the kind of hood thing that hangs over the face of the blood-starved beast is it's two flaps of skin because its skin is split along the back. And that's what's happening to the bloodletting beast as well, because its skin at the back is flayed. But it's not drooping down over its face because it still has muscle. It still has muscle on its back and it's all swollen. So, like, the other thing is that, and then the bloodletting beast is found as a boss in Thumaru, which is the chalice that's found in that church. And then there's a cut line from Alfred where he says, like, the church are desperate to get the Thumaru chalice back. And then there's, like, the skull, Lawrence's skull that's in the cathedral. There's been a lot of back and forth about this, about how it doesn't exactly match, but, like, it looks way, way more like the skull of the bloodletting beast than the skull of anything else in the game. It doesn't match exactly, but, like, it's close enough, and it's got, like, when you fight the bloodletting beast, it's got a huge gash on one side of its face where it's kind of all torn up. And that position matches exactly the damage done to the skull, which has a long fracture along one side of its face. So, like, you can argue night and day about how like, well, the snout's a bit too long and like it's a bit too small or a bit too big or something, but like if you have a creature in the game with a very telltale like wound on its head, and then later on, very explicitly, its head is removed, and then you have a skull that looks kind of like it fits, and it's got exactly the same damage in the same very telltale area. Like, I think that's very clearly what the designers at some point were flagging up. They were saying, like, this is the skull. When you defeat the bloodletting beast, it shows up again, but its head is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like everything is pointing to the bloodletting beast's head was removed, and that's what's in the cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, again, the story has been hacked up and changed quite a bit. All this cut content that's surfacing is telling completely different stories. But, like, I'm pretty sure what happened is that Lawrence went into Fumaru via the altar in the Church of the Good Chalice in Old Yarnum. And he transformed, and the clerics with him also transformed, and that's where the two blood-starved beasts come from. And that's why he never comes back, because he transformed into a beast in the Chalice dungeons. And he was going to Fumaru, I think, probably to look for Queen Yana. Because she's in Fumaru, and if he is able to get his hands on either Murgo or Murgo's cord, he can try beckoning Kos again, or beckoning another Great One using that child. So I think that's what they were going for at one point, and then it's become truncated in the version that we actually got.
Mm-hmm.
And like more DLC stuff is being dug up, and more base game stuff's being dug up, and there's dialogue that we know existed at one point because it's in trailers and things, but we haven't had it dug up in the base game yet. So it's still possible that like Lawrence dialogue will be dug up.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lawrence has two voice actors in the credits, and everything that we like, Micolash is a character with two voices. That is because Micolash, when he dies, he screams, and like the screaming is another actor apparently, because the actor who is voicing Micolash normally wasn't a very good screamer. So, but like, so Lawrence has two voice actors, but the Lawrence dialogue that we have, it's all very clearly one guy. So I suspect that the reason he has two voice actors is that there was another encounter with Lawrence, probably as a beast. And because he's a beast, he has a different voice actor. And maybe that will be dug up at some point.
That's cool. That would be cool.
And if I had to guess, I would say like it might have been like Ludwig, where like if you defeated Lawrence, maybe Lawrence's like head would be decapitated, and the head would talk to you, and it would be the same. Like, can you tell me about the church? Is everything going all right? You might have different dialogue if you had church.
Yeah, everything's going great. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, so I suspect that like maybe it's not in the game anymore, but maybe it existed at some point that like after defeating the bloodletting beast, it would reveal it was Lawrence, and you would have a conversation with it before it died.
So tell me about Micolash's childhood.
I like to think that maybe Micolash had like a crush on Rom, but he didn't want to say it. I like the idea of like he had a thing for her, but he didn't want to admit that like he couldn't stand the idea that someone was as smart or smarter than him. So her nickname of the vacuous Rom was him, and that's what he referred to her as behind her back. And he had
a bully.
he had a thing for her, but he didn't want to admit it.
Hmm. So that's why you can summon, what is it, Mensis members to fight Ebrietas?
Yeah, Damien. Damien is the best NPC in that game. in terms of summons, because he can heal you. He has a choir bell. So, like, I remember summoning him for Ebrietas and, like, almost dying and him saving me a couple of times in a row. And I was like, Damien,
Oh.
the best. He is.
He should. Oh my god! Shadows Die Twice is about Damien.
There we go. It's a
Boom.
spin-off about Damien. Damien wants to kill Rom, presumably because that will help the Menses ritual continue. Yeah, this is the thing, because, like, prior to the DLC, we were like, I don't understand what the exact relationship between Mensis and Rom is, but this kind of confirms that you can summon Damien to fight Rom for you. So, and he also fights Yuri in Bergenworth. So, like, it
Mm-hmm.
it looks like Mensis were trying to get Rom out of the way so they could continue the ritual, and therefore you can summon Damien to help you fight Rom. You can also summon him to fight Ebrietas.
What if they were trying to get to Rom so they can take her to the Nightmare of Menses so her and Micolash can finally get married?
Well, I think Rom, it wasn't reciprocal. I think
Oh,
Rom.
okay.
I I think like Rom and Yuri were that was the pairing, and Micolash. She didn't want anything to do with Micolash, but Micolash thought that she must because he's so great, and he couldn't quite pass that it's a woman he's not interested in.
I feel like they should make like a high school spin-off series of like Bergenworth and all that.
I'm surprised they haven't already. I'm sure there's a Flash game somewhere.
Okay. Um, I don't know. Is there anything else about Menses that?
Uh, I don't know. I think we've covered most of Menses.
Okay, yeah, I think so
Oh,
too.
do we want to talk about the mirrors?
Oh my god, I wanted to ask you about the mirrors like 3 days ago and forgot. Yeah.
Okay, so Yahagul is full of all these mirrors, and no one was quite sure what they did. And then the only like things to go off were hang on, I'm gonna burp. Hang on. Oh no, I'm not. All right. There we go.
That's going in the recording.
Okay, good.
Okay, go on.
So there were these mirrors all over Yahagul, and there was someone. There was a corpse on the side of one. There's a corpse like in the position in front of one that had frenzied cold blood. So it was like whatever was in this mirror caused this person to die of frenzy. And then in the Nightmare of Menses, when you fight Micolash, he can jump in and out of these mirrors like a
Like a
gateway.
portal type
Yeah,
thing?
and you can't do it, but he can. And there's also there's a corpse directly above in one of the areas where there are a whole lot of mirrors. The ceiling's not complete. It's like a grate that you can walk over, and there's a corpse on the grate that has the moon rune. So I think what's going on there is like they are reflecting. They're using these mirrors to reflect moonlight around Yahagul, similar to like what we were talking about with the lake at Bergenworth. That like Willem is there and he's considering the lake and the moon falling on the lake. There's a whole thing in Japanese folklore about like moonlight reflected in a puddle or reflected in a lake, like that's like a like you're going into it, like there's another world on the other side. Like the idea that there's another world on the mirror, kind of like you're not actually seeing your reflection, you're seeing another world where everything is backwards. So like and then the way you fight Rom is you jump into that lake that the moon is shining on. And then when you defeat Rom, you pop out in that the bath that's full of water. And then you
Right.
can use those baths full of water to sort of hop around Yahagul as in the same way Micolash jumps through the mirrors. So I think what they're doing in Yahogul is they're using all these reflective surfaces, whether it's mirrors or whether it's water, to reflect all this the moonlight around. And then when the pale blood sky happens, suddenly all the red light from the pale blood sky is going around Yahogul, and that's kind of what does most of the damage.
Hmm. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Um, oh, that there in the Nightmare of Menses, you find these weird, like half dog, half bird creatures.
Yeah,
What's up with that?
I don't. I think they're just like a nightmare creature, like the winter lanterns and like the crawlers and things. That's just like been created there. Like they may. I used to think before the DLC, I thought that like everything in the nightmare has to have been brought there from outside.
Hmm.
So they can't literally be like nightmare creatures. And I used to think maybe Menses were experimenting on animals, and that's where they came from. But right, I think they are just like a nightmare thing that's been conjured up as like a memory of Yarnum or something.
Hmm. Okay, cool. And like I think I don't remember where, like, but a little bit all around, you find these weird spiders with like an eye.
Oh, the spiders without heads, yeah.
What's up with that?
Okay, so those what I think is going on there is like those are the same spider body model that Patches uses and that the human headed spiders use. The only difference is that it doesn't have a head at all. So, like, when you talk about the eye, what the eye is actually like the joint where a head would be connected. Because, like, those spiders don't have like fangs or eyes or anything, they just have this little dot.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever those creatures are, that is just like there's pretty much like there's one model, which is the spider headed, no, it's the human headed spider with like the bowl cut, right? And the pendant. Patches is just that model without the hair. So you remove the hair, you have Patches. And then if you remove the head entirely, you have the giant spiders in Menses.
Oh, okay.
So it's like the same model repurposed 3 times. And I don't
Okay.
quite understand, like, maybe they were all intended to be human headed at one point and they removed them. Or I don't know what the story is, but like when that's what the quote unquote eye is, it's just like a joint where a head would be attached. So they don't have heads, and they have um they have an extra set of legs that a normal spider doesn't. They have 10 legs instead of 8.
Hmm.
And the Mensis, not Mensis, in Bergenworth, the Garden of Eye creatures, they have that rock with spider drawn on it, and that spider's got 10 legs as well. And
Hmm.
Rom's the Rom spiders that she summons, they have 10 legs. And Rom also discussing like models that were shifted. If you replace Rom's caterpillar legs with a set of spider legs that would fit in those holes in the side of her body, she would also have 10 legs.
Hmm.
So they were doing something with 10-legged spiders, but I don't know what.
Okay. Okay, cool. Do you find any Mensa stuff in the dungeons?
Um, oh, I don't. I don't think you can summon Mensa Scholar Damien. I'll look up Mensa Scholar Damien because I have the wiki open.
My cat is so funny. He keeps bringing me a ball and I throw it so he can go bring it back. He thinks he's a dog.
Oh,
So cute.
Yeah, you can summon Damien in the layer 3 ice chalice.
And who do you kill there with him?
Ebriatus.
Oh. Cool.
So yeah, I guess Damien goes to Ebriatus, goes to East to finish off the job and kill Ebriatus after he kills her in the main game.
Hmm. That's pretty mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, he needs to let it go.
he does.
Cool. Awesome. Um, well, I think that's about it for Menses until I come up with something a little later
Okay,
or in a couple of days. I'm like, hey, get your butt here. We gotta record. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for doing
that's all right.
this. Um, uh, well, do you still have time?
Yeah, I've got time. It's only like 10 to 6.
Okay, I was wondering, and I don't know if you're up for it. Do you wanna talk about a Dark Souls 1 character?
Okay, okay.
Is there one you prefer?
Oh, no. No, I thought you had one in mind.
Oh, well, you haven't played in like 14,000 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, do you remember anything about Solaire?
Yeah, he's like the main NPC.
I
Remember
know.
everything about Solaire.
That
That
was the
very
joke,
obscure
Richard.
character.
Yeah, I don't know if you even know him. It's from Dark Souls.